it's just like not a number in the data, like the Rex data sheet. So I was trying to figure out what was going on. And Alfonso suggested changing the threshold for the masking at the first level, which seemed to actually help a lot. But I think one of the things we wanted to just go through is just see why it wasn't, those areas weren't being included. So,
and just to add a little background to all of this. So basically, when we do ROI level analysis, we are asking the software to select the ball signal from a subset of voxels and just compute the average across all of those voxels that are within the ROI. And we are doing this after the first level analysis, right? So we whatever things have been estimated at first level, which are typically the contrast of interest across the conditions that we care about or something like that, we're estimating ROI level analysis to actually get those measures for every voxels and aggregate them across multiple voxels within the ROI. So the question is that the first level analysis has some masking that is done implicitly, and this is just part of the SPM default lingo and procedure, which basically tries to reduce the number of voxels in the analysis to only those that we care about, which are typically the within brain voxels. And the way that SPM has to determine which portion of the image that you provide is actually within the brain and which voxels are outside of the brain is to use what we call the global signal masking. And what they do is they compute the global signal, which is done, if I recall correctly, is they compute the average across all of the voxels across the entire volume, and then compute the 25% of that, the voxels that are survive that 25% of that global average, and compute, and that use that as an intermediate mask to compute the actual global signal within those voxels. And then once they've computed that new global signal within a reduced set of voxels across the entire brain, they use the mask, is the typical default value, which is 80% of that value. So any voxels where the ball signal average across all time points is below 80% of what the global signal is at a given time point is considered to be outside of the brain. And that's the default setting in all first level analysis. And that when SPM runs first level analysis for us, basically it's only computing first level analysis for those voxels that survive this threshold, and is entering Nora numbers for every other voxels that are typically outside of the brain. And then when we provide those measures of effect size measures to the ROI level analysis, within an ROI, typically there are going to be some voxels that are within the brain and they're going to contain actual numbers, and there are going to be some other voxels that are going to contain just Nora numbers, which represent voxels within the mask, within the region that we care about that are outside of the brain. And the ROI level analysis, what it does is disregards anything that is outside of the brain. So if it finds that you want to aggregate across 100 voxels and 10 of those are just have Nora number values, then it just disregards those and uses the other 90 and computes the average across all of them. But in some cases, the entire mask is outside of the brain, and all of the values that it's getting is not a number. And for those cases, particularly when doing subject-specific analysis, if for a particular subject and for a particular ROI, all of the voxels within that ROI our software is seeing not a numbers, then it's considering that the whole brain, well, the whole region is outside of the brain and is providing not a number for that particular subject. And the question is what to do with those cases. We want to relax the threshold a little bit more so that we are a little bit more inclusive and include voxels that are perhaps a little bit outside the brain but not so terribly bad. Or we want to disregard those subjects and just improve our way of dealing with missing data and just consider whatever number of subjects that actually we have data for and do the second level analysis only on those subset of subjects or something in between. So that's kind of like the goal of this exploration, to figure out what is going on, whether it's something reasonable or not, whether it has to do with the locations of our masks or just the variability, particularly in subcortical structures that just happen naturally after normalization, and learn a little bit more about that. Make sense? Do you have any questions?
So, do we look and confirm that the masks are in the right place?
So that's what I'm about to show.
That's what we are about to look at. We want to look at the actual ball signal, average ball signal for a given subject, and look at the mask location and figure out why this is happening. Is it because the masks are in the wrong location, or it's just normal? Sometimes the acquisitions that we get don't get the entire cerebellum, for example, and some masks that might be in the inferior portion of the cerebellum might be totally outside of the acquisition. So that would be another reason to not have any value within those voxels. So I don't know. We want to see what is going on, basically.
So this was for your subcortical?
Yes, this is for subs. So it was the SL, it's like SL, SC ROIs, SPM12, total probable Yes, the probabilistic. Yes. Yes. Exactly. All right. So.
Oh, I have one more question. So
Oh,
is
yeah.
it like the binary mask or the?
It's a binary mask. Yep. Let me share my screen. Oh, I see. Alfonso, can you see this?
I see the image a little bit cropped. Let me see whether there's a problem with my viewer. Now I see. Now it looks normal. Yeah, that's fine.
Weird. When it's on the second screen that we can see, it works okay. But now when I move it over to here, it's like,
Oh, no, it's working.
oh, great. Excellent.
She's just like, what's not working?
So I just pulled up in preview a couple of participants that had, well, I pulled up two participants that had, just for an example, globus pallidus external part, that had either had no data for that ROI, and then a couple that did, just to kind of look at the difference. So all of the subjects that I'm looking at now are in MNI space, normalized space. And then just to kind of give you an idea, actually, I might have the lights are off. Let's see, because these are kind of. So these are the ROIs as they line up with.
If you just want to say a random color map, it'll
Sure.
change the colors too. If that works for you. Red color. Or I'm sorry, look on to you.
Oh, that worked. Yeah.
It seems
So-
I'm looking at your other window in the shared. So the thing that is being shared is probably your other window because it's static and it's not changing. While I see on the projector that you are changing the image.
Oh, that's weird.
What is that?
Oops! Now it's moving. Okay, now I see that.
See it, but we can't.
Oh, it doesn't work. We can always look here.
Oh, that's true.
Together.
I was just gonna say, I have
Oh.
ultimate puzzle rotation.
Now it goes away. All right. Well,
Is it because you have a second screen versus your slide or something?
maybe.
Want to maybe try mirroring?
Yeah.
Yay! That's great.
Nice. Okay. Okay. So these are the ROIs overlaid on to the mean. This is the normalized art mean R sub. So there's one subject, and these are their subjects. Yeah. And the one ROI that we're looking at here is this. So if we look at a lot less, a lot lower the resolution. All right, so we go to. So one thing that we can notice when if I turn off this is that this area has a you can't even see it on the screen. There's like a huge dip in the signal around that area in all subjects.
I can't really see that. See if I can change the color. And you can go to that volume and go and change the brightness. Just make it
Oh,
nice and bright.
Yeah, because it is a little more visible on the screen.
How do I do that? So that's one way, and you can change the windows and play with levels and window. Yeah, I don't think that'll work.
so basically right here.
Can you just click on and off the
Yes. Yep.
I see.
Yeah.
So do you think that's being marked as non-brain?
So yes, so that's what I was thinking originally, and what's interesting is it's actually pretty similar for this is a subject that had some. Oh, of course, didn't change that one. There was a couple subjects that it did have that it did include in the analysis, but that also had that divot. So it may have just been the amount of there may have been some voxels that were left after masking. So if we look at one of the subjects' masks,
Is the mouse the activation? No.
the mask is what Alfonso was explaining before, which was I think 80% of the average gold signal, where it says anything below that, it's not part of the brain. So if we look at this mask, there's this huge chunk of subcortical areas that are
being
masked out.
classified as non-brain.
Yeah.
Or under threshold?
Yes, exactly. So they're under the threshold.
Can you toggle on and off that on the is that mask?
This is I believe this is for the.
You have 4 volumes and 3 masks.
Yeah, so the masks are just different levels of thresholding for one subject. Let's see, just double check. Oh, sorry, there's no subject. Right. That's the subject.
I don't understand that. This seems like a bizarre way to mask out. Because can you keep doing that? Just keep going. If you can, leave it here and go down, go up.
Oh.
Okay, go down. Right there. Yeah, do it again. So, I mean, that's most of thousands go on too. So, this seems bizarre, Alfonso. This would be the case for getting rid of the non-brain. Given, and ultimately, if we're using the ROIs, you could really lower that threshold quite a bit.
Yeah. So when I lower to 50%, you get something that's a lot nicer. And when you lower it to 25%,
Even then, it's still getting rid of.
It is still getting rid of GP.
Sorry, is this 25% or 50%?
This is 50%.
So if you just do this, then all the skull shows up, right? Even 75%.
Right. For the ROI analysis, though, it doesn't actually matter because you're not using.
Right, but I mean, it just as a way of doing this, why not use co-registered anatomical scan? Which is what I thought we were. I mean, we do that, right? We use an anatomical scan, mask out non-brain stuff.
I think.
Right, Alfonso?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
We use an anatomical scan, right, to mask out as a mask, just by default, right?
Not in this analysis. No, we are not using. Well, we use it at the second level analysis, but not at the first level analysis. We are not masking. We are only using this. We are letting SPM use the default implicit masking procedure, which is this basically.
Because if this is the case, this calls it. So let's say we weren't doing ROI analysis.
Yeah, this also happens for voxel level analysis, and
right. When we don't see pallidum activation, this is it, right? Even at 50%, the pallidum
this is
lower.
This is still is excessive masking basically, and we are using the default level. This is 80%, right? Yeah.
Is this? Do you have any idea whether FSL or any other packages do this?
No, I don't know. I don't know if my know is I don't know. I don't know if they don't or they do something similar. But this is the kind of like all default values in SPM. So this is, if you're using SPM, this is kind of like the default setting values that you see. There was some discussion back then whether the new like 32 channel type of machines that gives you like higher signal to noise ratio at the borders and lower at the center, and they create this type of like holes at the center of the brain, whether that was an issue or not. But it never got around, at least in terms of the SPM, to an actual change in the threshold value. So I don't know. I think we might benefit from actually using a lower threshold value for all of our analysis in this, because this type of holes in the middle of the brain, they are totally unnecessary, because this thresholding is mostly just to reduce the computational load and a little bit to improve signal to noise ratio by removing analysis on voxels that you know they are totally outside of the brain. But this is not the case for many of these like inside of the brain masks. So I think we should definitely lower the threshold. And these are the masks that are just created by the first level analysis, right? These are the
correct.
Right.
So if the masking, even at 50%, we know excludes voxels that are in the brain. We know they're part of the brain, and it's leaving in voxels that we know are not in the brain.
Right. We can remove the masking entirely, right? You can just a minus infinite value for the mask. That's a way to stop SPM from doing this implicit masking. So we could do that if that, I don't know, if we cannot come up with a reasonable value that gives us a good and obvious discrimination between the brain and outside of the brain, because this thing, this is picking up. I don't know if is that the skull actually what we are seeing as the border, or is it like a CSF, like a layer that we are seeing there, Jason?
Well, let's go. Let's take a look here. Pulled off the masks. That looks like Scully to me.
That's all skull,
right? Or yeah.
Well, I don't have the anatomical to compare, but yeah, it might be actually some of the skull.
So, and if we in our standard procedure is to get an anatomical scan, we spend all kinds of time trying to make sure. We've spent a lot of time over the last year working on how to unwarp the EPI scans and to improve co-registration. Why can't we just use that mask?
Right, we do have that mask, and we could use that mask for the first level analysis if we want to, or we could use no mask at all, because at this point we don't even care about masking that much. But we could, the best possible mask that we could use, I think it will be the WC0 type of mask. Well, I think it's called, what is it called? I don't recall. There is a mask that is created as part of the normalization by combining the gray matter, white matter CSF masks. That's like I think that is in the structural folder, so that would be within the ANAT subfolder. And I don't know if FreeSurfer also generates a reasonable like inclusive mask of all of the voxels in the brain.
Like that seems like a.
Right, that's kind of like the structural image that just has values. It's just like an overlay of the actual structural data and this mask, the one that includes only gray matter, white matter, and CSF areas. And that's a very reasonable sort of in-brain masking that we could use instead of the implicit masking.
Can I just, at the risk of wasting people's time a little bit? So you said that there was talk recently or a few years back about whether or not to change this.
Right. I mean, or at least to pay. Yeah, there is some talk about paying more attention to this type of masking procedures that SPM does, and this came to light because this implicit masking that SPM did, like since I don't know, since '95 or something. That is when SPM started. They have been using pretty much the exact same masking procedure, this global signal masking. But it became a little bit more obvious with the newer data that masking was not all that great because it was kind of like producing the signal to noise, the curve of the signal to noise ratio for the new 32 channel coils, which have a lot of sensitivity at the borders, but not so much at the center of the brain. That is kind of different from what it used to be. And that was kind of like the whole argument. But it never ended up, or at least as far as I know, the argument didn't end, basically, at some point saying, yes, we should use this alternative. It just say, well, we should be paying more attention to this masking because it's a little bit of an issue now because the mask seems to be more sensitive. Well, the data that we're getting seems to be more sensitive at the borders and not so much at the centers. And what do we do with that? So I don't know.
So the idea here is, if it's only in one or two brains, I guess it would be interesting to look at some other masks. But before we do that, just to make sure it's necessary, but in the voxel-based analysis, if it's masked out in a couple of brains, you'd still get an average, right, for that voxel to go on to.
Right. The procedure it effectively treats the Nora numbers as zeros in voxel level because the voxel analysis requires you to have the same degrees of freedom across all voxels. So for the maps to be homogeneous and such, you cannot use like different type of number of subjects across different voxels. So the trick is basically to put zeros for the Nora numbers. And that's what happens at the voxel level analysis across all subjects. If you have a subject that had this mask that was masking out some region of the brain, then that subject will end up having zeros at those voxels and counting as a no effect, basically, as in the second level aggregation analysis. Which is a reasonable trick. It's not exactly the optimal procedure, but it's a reasonable
you end up with unknowingly, because you won't. I don't pretend to be the person that knows the most about this. I think been clear about that. But the fact that I could be involved in this for this long and not know that this is happening because you just don't, I don't know. It just seems bizarre. And especially if people understand how much is actually knocked out, you can be reporting things like, well, we didn't see a change in the pallidum for a long time. And maybe it's because when you run your 14 subjects for 6 of them, or 8 or 10, it actually could be 10. They just wasn't, it was masked out.
Right, and we could potentially just look at the masks that have been generated and aggregating them across subjects just to see to what extent this issue affects particular regions that we care about. But my impression is that this issue is going to affect mostly subcortical analysis because that's where the kind of like dip in signal to noise ratio kind of like happens in the image sensitivity. And not so much cortical analysis because that is where basically all of these you have the highest signal and also the highest noise ratio of that.
But that's what it's doing. It's basically you're extremely penalized for jumping to the 32 channel because it's basically saying like the mask is basically masking out where that we know that it's already a lower signal. So, and we know that range is higher. The shift from near the coil toward the center is higher, and to not adjust this seems
right. And typically, it used to be that this type of masking individual.
That's the right word. All right. So how difficult would it be for us to implement this mask, an anatomical mask at the first level? So assuming that it's worth masking at all, which I'm guessing it is, if people said, well, it looks like you're going to lose a lot of the subcortical structures if we keep this masking. And I know there's an argument on the side that said, yeah, but we still need the mask because it gives us this. assuming that we do need to mask, how difficult is it to implement the anatomical mask? And in your opinion, do we need to mask?
Well, the
First level.
the problem with not masking is that if the actual beta estimates, which are the ones that are fed into the second level analysis at the areas where there is no signal, they are arbitrary, and this arbitrary can also mean arbitrarily large. So they can be very bad values if what you are feeding into the second level analysis you don't mask at all. But so that's a reason to mask. Another reason to mask is just for computational loads, just because, I don't know, if 2/3 of the data that you are analyzing are just outside of the brain, why to analyze that data at all? But the most important is probably this kind of like the removing the voxels where the beta estimates are just pure noise and they might have very large values. And in any sort of aggregation like this smoothing or ROI level analysis, then those may be affecting inappropriately the average, these aggregate signals. So there is some masking I think is important to have, but this masking we need to fix, I think. And I'm not totally sure whether the best approach would be just to reduce that value, to remove that masking completely, or to enter the anatomical mask. I would lean towards entering the anatomical mask because it's the most accurate representation of a mask of what regions are brain and which regions are not. But the only reason why I'm doubting is because I imagine that in some data sets, we might not have that very good correlation between anatomical and structural. And do we want to penalize those kind of like analysis or those data sets where we don't have a good correlation by using a mask that might not be all that accurate? And we should be instead try to use a mask that actually comes from the pulse signal so that it doesn't have those issues from correlation. So I'm not totally sure. What do you guys think?
So would it be possible to keep it flexible and then, have a step where,
Right. I mean, currently, yeah, I didn't mention that. Currently, we have all of the options. It's already in the FL pipeline. We have options to remove, to change the value of this threshold that we use. We have the option to include an external mask if we want. So we can do, it's just, so what we want to decide is basically which one is going to be our new default settings, basically. But the flexibility is in there in the software. You can just specify an explicit masking, specify that you don't want to mask at all, or change the threshold of the mask. So those options are already available through our scripts already. We don't have to change it.
What I would say is, my hunch is that mask, if I look at like we can look at how this mask lines up. We can look at how the free surfer has something called brain mask, which is this same thing. I think when you look at over the whole brain, it's actually, the alignment is going to be pretty good even when it's not great, because it's just, I think it's going to look pretty good. We talk about the alignment being poor, while the sulci, like the gyri, aren't quite lining up, where they're shifted a little bit. This is on a bigger scale. I think it'll be all right. And then if we need to, you can go back to something like, so the BB register tool in FreeSurfer allows you to, when you run it, it'll pop up a little GUI. You can look at the brain and you can actually say, well, you know what, something's wrong here. And you can play around with it, which is not, that's sort of like a last option that you want to take, but you can actually literally manually try to improve it. And there are tools in, say, I know in FSL that are built in, and you can use MATLAB. SPM may have it where you just say dilate by one voxel. If you think it's bad, you can dilate it. So you're just moving it out a little bit. But what you're not doing is, and there's there might be a little bit of a consequence of doing that, but it's certainly much better than dropping all of the basal ganglia and thalamus, which it looks like happened for this person.
Well, so there were still some voxels for thalamus and putamen and some others. So it didn't. So I wouldn't have even known had all of the voxels not been there for that particular ROI.
Because that's
Right. Do you have an image? Because if I'm trying to think, if we lower the threshold to, I don't know, 0.25 or something like that, that would be like very inclusive mask. And it would include pretty much everything. And we can probably leave.
It's 50. Oh, wait, no. Oh, this is 25, yeah.
Yes, yeah, right. So it might be removing a few voxels at the center, but those are never going to be the majority of the voxels.
That's 25.
At a region that we care about. So that's probably inclusive enough. So the only concern for using this type of liberal masking would be whether the actual values that we get for the, let's say for the skull, that we know there is nothing in there. Could you just look at the beta values or the con images for that particular subject to see whether we get like ridiculously large values or ridiculously noise, but relatively close to zero values at those regions?
So for that subjects.
So for that same subject, if you go to the directory where you have the first level analysis, could we just look at one of the contrast images? Just, it doesn't matter which one it is. Just to see whether we get some absurdly large values in those out of brain voxels that we really want to make sure that we remove, or they are going to be just pure noise, but they don't seem to be out of scale with respect to other things. In that case, we don't care that it's not all that bad if we include them.
So this would be the first level results for that.
Right, so it would be within a folder for a subject. It would be results, first level, then the name of the analysis. Yeah, like speech, or I don't know which one you're using. Yeah, and then within that folder, something that is called con_1 or 2. You probably have a speech minus space in contrast there or something like that. Okay. So, and just browse up and down just to see whether the ridiculously large values that we see are outside of the brain, which seem to be the case. Okay, so well, no, I mean those are inside of the brain, right? Those are like auditory areas or central sulcus type of thing. Right. Okay. Great. So I want to make sure that if this type of masking doesn't include things that might be totally disproportionately bad. Okay, and it doesn't seem to be out of the scale with respect to other noise components within the brain. Okay, that looks fine. Okay, so I would say that yes, using something like a liberal threshold would be probably the best option right now. Just something like 25 seems to include all of them, but I don't know. Either that or using the anatomical masking. But again, for the anatomical, I will want to make sure that we are not introducing any additional variability across our different studies that might not have all of that. Great, because the advantage of using this type of masking that is based on the functional data itself is always proper space, right? It doesn't matter whatever thing happened to the anatomical, where you do have anatomical or not, this is always the correct space, while anything else, it has the same type of deformations as your actual pulse signal, so it's actually, you don't have to worry about all of those potential issues. So as long as this,
provided that you're comfortable going into it knowing that it's actually not going to mask out a bunch of non-brain.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, it's fine. I mean, for many analyses, we don't use any masking at all, right? And we just do masking at the second level, and that's fine. I mean, this is just, well, we want to keep the default settings in SPM, which if we do, we don't have to explain what we are doing because we just say we are using SPM default settings, so we want to change them. If we want to change them, we have to say so in our analysis sections, in our papers, and we want to make sure that we change it to something.
I'm happy to write that up for the first person that publishes one of these and says we changed it from the default because the default selectively
because the default is bad.
Subcortical areas that we know are involved in speech.
Exactly.
Well, okay. So, good catch.
So use a lower threshold then.
Okay, so I would say for now, just lower threshold, and we will explore a little further to see where the anatomical type of threshold might make more sense. What do you say, Jason?
I thought like a few minutes ago, we all agreed that using the anatomical is a better idea.
Right. Yeah, but that's because I was mostly concerned about. Sorry about that.
I think we should consider again, with the understanding that it is good to mask. I would say let's use the anatomical because then you're going to, or let's at least look. I'm happy to sit down if someone generates the masks. In fact, we do this with the QA, right? Don't we look at the masks overlaid on the functionals? So I believe, right, the outline of that mask, isn't that overlaid on the functional data
exactly.
in the QA step?
It's not like a binary mouse.
Not this mask. I mean the anatomical mask.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
so-
right.
So, and I'll add that to it. So first, I'm happy to look through and see like, oh, okay, for this, let's look at, try to identify. I know like with the rhythm study, there's like one subject in particular that's moving all over the place.
Yeah.
We can look at some. I mean, there you go. That's one way to solve that problem. But we can look at a range of. We've already done this, and they look pretty darn good. They look pretty darn good.
Right.
And if we find that, well, actually with this in mind, it doesn't look as good, we could consider that just dilating by a voxel or something like that. I'm happy to sit down and do that. I'm happy to sit down and look at these. I'm very curious to look at the masks, to think about it, to see how they may have affected previous analyses. But I would vote if it's good to mask to use the anatomical, because you're going to get rid of a ton more voxels this way of just gobbledygook.
Alfonso, can we also just add like a line or something to the documentation that says, should look at your mask? Because I feel like it's the kind of thing that it's easy to, until you run into an issue, like an explicit issue like that.
Well, and here's the thing. When you said that, if you had said that to me at 9:25, I'd have said we do that. Here's the anatomical mask that it's generated.
Right, but we weren't.
But that's wrong. That's another mask. So that's the thing. What other things should we be worried about, Alfonso? This is why it's really difficult when a bunch of tool developers make these decisions. I'm not talking about you, Alfonso. You are you're very brain oriented. That's why you're so valuable. But I know these other people. I've met them. It's just, we don't get the palatum. Well, but when we do our statistical modeling, it's better if we do it this way. Okay. So yeah, let us know if something else pops up that you in your travels. It seems like. Yeah, well,
I feel like
guiding. I don't say guided.
He's been buried in a lot of FSL stuff like this recently.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
very depressing.
So, okay. Well, good catch, Saul. Malab owes you a beer. And Alfonso for tracking this down.
That's true.
Right. Just like a gift coffee basket would probably be more appreciated.
Delivered to the correct
Yep. All right. Now what do? We just all stop, go back, redo everything.
So what does this affect? It affects ROI analyses that use.
So it affects any volume-based analysis.
It potentially affects any analysis of the subcortical areas, right? Because what we need to see is how representative is this subject. So if you look at the masks of other subjects,
You could do that.
is it
Right. You can just enter all of those masks into a second level analysis and do a one sample to test across all subjects and look at the average basically. And the average is going to tell you the proportion of subjects that have for each voxel, that tells you how many were within the brain.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the typical thing that is going to happen basically for at the borders, subcortical structures at the border, and subcortical structures also have a lot of variability across subjects in the actual normalization. So they are supposed to be normalized in the same place, but they are not quite all that well normalized because the normalization algorithm doesn't pay that much attention to them.
So we're going to switch the default to the anatomical mask, and then we're all going to rerun our subcortical analysis.
Well, I think for now, until we decide which anatomical mask we want to use, I think just so as a quick and dirty solution, lower the threshold for your analysis. And we'll look at the masks, anatomical masks, to see which one is the best to use. Do we want to use the one that is generated by SPM normalization? Do we want to use the one that is generated by FreeSurfer? Do we want to dilate them or not, depending on how they look? And we'll decide that hopefully soon. But until that happens, if you just want to get your results for now, just lower the threshold to something like 25%.
And the Q right now in Q, so any user should be able to. The QAs run by default, right?
Well, we run.
Right.
You run them.
But
You should be able to call up and look at that mask outline overlaid on the functional data. And I believe if you do it after the first level, like if you do it, you should also be able to look at the free surface. Well, that's free surfaces. That's a brain mask.
Yeah.
So we can do that too. It's just what we need to make sure is that you go from brain mask, the free surface space, co-register with functional data space, and that transformation should be around because the Alfonso already has the surfaces.
Is there something like this already available as one of like the preset QA plots, or no?
There is for the former. There is with the brain mask.
With the brain mask?
This is for the anatomical. Yes, you can display the borders of the anatomical mask on top of the actual functional data.
Yes, right.
And if you can run it through free surfer, you will see the blue and red lines for the two free surfer areas.
And you can look at the free surfer surfaces,
right,
as a default, but that's not a good indicator. Those surfaces are they're tight, they're shrunken.
Yeah.
And so what we want to look at is the brain mask. I believe brain mask MGZ is, and I'll write a note to self to see if there's brain.mgc and brain mask MGZ, and I'll
I think one has this salt structure, doesn't it? But this decision making could happen relatively quickly, as in like we're talking about 1 to 2 weeks possibly, or
well, so I have to work on a couple of other things today.
Yeah.
But if you could, how easily can we? So I don't know. Do you feel like you're at a stage where you can look at the masks, like the ones that the SPM masks, and see how well they're aligned with the functional? All you're looking
like
is
the existing ones?
is there functional data that falls outside this mask?
Yeah.
But I could sit down. Like if everybody had that, so that we could just like loaded
Quickly
them
go
up
through
and rifle through it, we could say this looks okay. Obviously, you want to look as much as possible at the variability, and looking at the ACE data, for instance, would be a good test case for this. So,
well, we could all decide to have that organized by like next Monday, and then just send the next meeting through everyone's registration.
Mask party.
A costume party, but
it's a
masquerade.
That's a masquerade. Stepping it up today. That's awesome. I don't know if it's coffee. So I do feel better now than I did a few minutes ago. Okay.
As in, I would prefer to do that than to
rerun stuff, yeah.
Like redo it with a lower threshold, because like I'm at the point where I'm really close to finalizing my results. So whatever that means, whatever.
Actually, see if there's a problem.
But like whatever that means. But as in, it doesn't make sense to me to redo and redo and redo. Like if I potentially can just redo one more time.
Yeah.
Because I am heading to the right of place.
Right. Yes.
So at a certain point in the not too distant future, I will be finishing that manuscript and submitting it. So as in, it cannot no longer be in flux relatively quickly.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
That might be an over-ambitious goal, but
what I'm wondering
at a
is,
certain point it's going to go.
if we can accelerate it a little bit, and maybe, well, I would like to take some time, if people organize them, to just look through them before next Monday.
Okay.
Is that, if possible?
Yeah.
And just so that I can get a sense of like what sort of criteria would we need to meet where we'd say let's not use it. Just want to get a sense for Maybe these are a lot worse than I think, but it seems I recall them being okay. And when we use that mask, the this SPM anatomical mask that you showed us, Alfonso, that the brain that you just showed us.
You mean the TPM or which one?
The one that we were just looking at. It looked like a really nice.
Oh, the one.
The structural data. Yeah.
That's the subject's structural, and so
In MNI space.
in MNI space, and that itself could serve as the mask. So wherever there's a voxel that's labeled there.
Right. So that's is a structural data for that subject, which has been cropped to only within brain masks. So basically, the skull has been stripped, for example, because and the way that is done is basically by computing the sum of the masks that are produced in normalization as the gray matter, white matter, and CSF, and the sum of those three masks is basically anything that is actually within the brain and it's not bone or air or anything that we don't call soft tissue. So that's the kind of like the in-brain mask, and that we can use also for our functional data, for example.
And when we do the QA, it seems like my recollection is that there's actually like an outline that you can play with. There's like a threshold, and you can make it tighter or less tight.
Right, but that threshold happens with the gray matter, not with that mask. So it's only one component of that whole mask. It's only I mean, I could add it to the quality assurance, just something that acts on that mask itself, because that might be also a useful thing to have.
Okay, I mean, so in the QA now, it's not like that anatomical. Does that SPM anatomical get like brought up as like an overlay?
Yes, you can, and you can threshold based on the intensity values of that anatomical, but it's not the same as thresholding based on the mask of the within brain voxels. Or you can threshold also based on the mask of gray matter voxels that have been determined from that structural data itself. But there is again not the same as masking through the in-brain voxels. Will be a combination of three different masks. So you cannot do exactly the same as what you're describing in the quality assurance, but you can do something relatively similar currently.
Okay.
I think for the purposes of determining whether that mask is going to work best is just to display that just the structural correlator to the functional data that and even with the current set of masking based on the gray matter voxels, the gray matter segmentation, that's going to be the most useful thing, because we care about the borders being captured well. The border between the gray matter and white matter, whether that is correct or not, is not going to affect the actual boundary distribution of the combined mask, because that border gets removed basically by combining both gray matter and white matter, and the same thing within the CSF. So basically, it's kind of like the outside border of the brain, which we want to make sure that is fine, and that is basically captured by the gray matter voxels. So if we display those gray matter contours that have been derived from the structural data on top of the functional data, and that is already part of the quality assurance plots that are generated automatically, then that would be the most informative way of figuring out whether that would act as a reasonable mask for our purposes as well.
Okay. So if we want to, so I think that'll be pretty straightforward. If we want to look at the brain mask from, so one of the volumes, the free surfer generated volumes, and have those aligned with the functional data, is there, could you just, I don't know, just email us I know the Con has, I think Con has some nice tools for doing that.
Right, and which mask are you referring to? The one that
a mask, so a brain volume in free surfer, so a free surfer generated brain volume. So it's, instead of the T1.mgz, it's one a little further down the pipeline, but it'd be in the same, it's in, free surfer space.
Cool.
So it would have to be either in the, whatever the functional data space is that we want to look at. If that's in, I guess if that's an MNI space.
That's what, I mean, that's so far that's what we're looking at. Which I don't,
it doesn't do that automatically, but I believe that Alfonso does that, because he takes he actually, there's a point where we can look at the free surfer surfaces generate. So it's just going to be applying whatever transformation.
Free surfer surfaces, though, are not in MNI space. But when we look at
no, they are in subject space, those.
And we look at them overlaid on the
Subject
subjects.
space.
It's functional.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that could work too. But that's I think, Alfonso. That's the thing.
Okay, I'll send you a line of how to generate these plots of counter plots with whatever set of data that you care about. There's going to be some mask file which you want to use and some functional file that you want to use. And I'll show you a line of how to create the same process we get in quality assurance plots, but just from the command line.
Okay.
And yes, that would be fantastic. If we can gather that information for next Monday, then we will have a very good basis to decide which ones can be the default setting in our pipeline.
Okay.
Unless you really cannot wait until that to happen, then try just the 25% threshold type of thing, and that would be a reasonable thing. That is a defensible thing that we can defend, like in the manuscript if you need.
And that's just an extra flag that you supply. Like for
The first
hashtag,
level.
whatever.
Right, and the first level is an extra. It's called mthresh, if I recall. So you try it, right? Do you recall?
Yeah, and then just put a 0.25 or 0.5.
Right, in the same configuration file that you use for defining the first level model configuration options.
Right. Yeah.
And when you look at the functionals, you said that it's pretty much across all the subjects where Palladium is low, like noticeably lower than.
I haven't looked at all of them, but that's the
Very
general.
interesting.
And
If that's the case, we should look into that. That'd be an interesting thing to look into. And I'm sure everyone's going to find out somewhere.
And actually, I'm not sure. I wonder if there's a difference between the 32 channel and the 64 channel. Well, we have collected data here as well. I haven't looked into if there's
Yeah. I guess I don't know if there's a noticeable difference, but there would be a difference in the relative amount. So this whatever penalty we're paying with this on the 32 channel, it should be a higher penalty. It's not the 64, but I don't think it's as big a jump as from 12 to 32. Simply because I think that the coils are better. We want to know that. And I would be interested in looking at the masks, the sol masks, the ones that are generated by this SPM.
Yeah, sure.
So to see what are there other areas that are penalized.
And at some point, perhaps we could include that. We should include that as part of the quality assurance plots, because there are even other scenarios where those masks. There are some times where those masks are created incorrectly just because of other reasons, such as like a machine outlier at some time point, because these masks are generated for whatever is happening across any time point. If you just have a very bad image, sometimes you get a very bad mask because of that. That's just due to one particular scan that is affecting the whole mask. And so perhaps we should have something in the quality assurance plots that actually displays those masks more easily, so that we can double check in the future for future analysis that everything looks fine in terms of those masks as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we ready to switch? I just have a really small question. Alfonso, I sent you a bunch of errors recently, and I know for sure you addressed the statistical thresholding one, because that was a more critical error, but then there was a few other ones that I was running into, like the parallelization wasn't working, and it was just a few directory changes, and I was just wondering if those have been addressed.
Could you recall me? I don't recall which ones were they. Could you remind me? Sorry.
Yeah, I can just resend you the email if you like, but when I was trying to parallelize the pre-processing step across subjects, that wasn't working. So I had to do each subject individually. And there was just a couple of other small things where, in various steps, by the end of this processing step, I'd end up in some like SVM directory instead of the folder I started.
Right. I haven't addressed that. Could you just resend me the email, just because I probably got down in my queue there of things. Sorry about that.
And they weren't high priority, but they were still things that it would be nice for them to be addressed at some point.
Right, just send me that email. I'll take a look as soon as possible, and I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Right. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the new functionality for subject-specific analysis that I just added it to the documentation, but I didn't mention anywhere. So I wanted to very briefly at least show you how that works. Let me just, if you have a second, let me just share my window for that. And I'll show you how that works. Can you see my window there?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see, I think here. So basically when you are defining an ROI, when you are running second-level analysis across ROI, you use this nomenclature, which is just up to this point is all the same as running the standard second-level analysis, but then you just add a name there, which is typically a name of an atlas, that is associated with a file that is called ROI underscore something, that atlas. If you say atlas, then this thing is going to look for a file that is called ROI underscore atlas.config. And this is where you specify the nature of your ROIs, right? Whether you have one or multiple ROIs, where those are coming in atlas files or individual masks, all of that information you specify into these configuration files. And the format of those is just specifying a list of files here, and then you specify ROI measures, whether you want to compute the average or something else, whether you want to threshold it, whether you want to select a subset of labels, and whether there is a subject-specific ROI. And this subject-specific ROI is a functionality that wasn't there, or at least it wasn't kind of like standardized before. So I worked towards doing that in a couple of ways. So we have two ways of specifying subject-specific ROIs now that weren't all that clear or that obvious before. The first one.
Alfonso, can you zoom in a bit?
All right. Let me see. Can you? Or I can just zoom there. Right. Can you see this?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. So yes, when you specify an ROI, you have like two ways of specifying. Well, typically you specify the list of ROI files. If it's a file that is an ROI that is defined in M&A space, then just point to it, and that is perfectly fine. But if you have something else, for example, a subject-specific ROIs, then you will have to specify a different file per subject, and that is a difficult thing or not obvious thing of how to do basically, and we have two ways of doing that now. You can do that by specifying the subject-specific ROIs at the level of when you import the data, when you import each individual subject. In addition to pointing to where the functional data and the structural data is for the subject, you can also point to where the ROIs, the subject-specific ROIs that you care about are for that particular subject. So we have functionality to do that. Let me look for it. You can do that at the level of when you enter the functional data. Remember when you enter the functional, when you import the data, you have a field, you have something like, if you have an experiment that is called ACE, you have a file that is called ace01.config for subject one within the ACE experiment, and within that config file you specify functionals, the source of your functional data, structurals, a lot of other information. Now you can also specify ROIs, and you can say ROIs.files for the actual subject-specific ROIs that you care about, and then give them a name here, ROIs.names. And also you can specify if you want those files to use alternative label files. Label files are for atlas files. When you have an ROI that is an atlas, typically it has an associated file that has the same file name as the atlas file. So, for example, if I have a file that is called atlas.me, that is a nifty file that contains multiple ROIs, then I would also have a file that is called atlas.txt that contains the labels for the different ROIs within the atlas file. Sometimes those label files are located in different places, or you want to specify something different for that, so you can specify that in here. If you don't specify that label files explicitly, the FL is going to look at where there is an associated .text file together with that nifty file that you're specifying. If it exists, it's going to interpret that as the source of your labels, and if it doesn't exist, then it's going to use arbitrary names like cluster 1, cluster 2, and so on. Okay, so this is where you specify subject-specific ROIs, and then you can go to the other place to this when you specify your ROI level analysis. Sorry, the next one. Where am I? In here. And just enter the actual names that you gave to those ROIs. Remember that it was a field that was called ROIs.names. So if you gave them a name that is, I don't know, my speech lab ROIs, then enter that name in here directly as below the ROIs field, and that will be interpreted as a subject-specific ROI. And it will feed that information for every individual subject. It will use whatever files you pointed at during the import step. And a second way to specify subject-specific ROIs, if you have them, this is basically works for any arbitrary source of the ROI, the subject-specific files. You have them located in whatever subject directory, or they have any complicated names, or they come from the free server files. For any, this gives you the most flexibility. But sometimes it's even simpler if they have some particular naming structure that is. You have them organized by subject ID. The subject ID are the different IDs of your subjects. So if you have the ACE experiment, that will be ACE01, ACE02, and ACE03, and so on. So if you can specify the ROI file just by pointing to a name, a location within your hard drive, and that name just has a portion of the folders, the path structure or something, or even the file name that has a key, the subject ID, then you can just enter something. Like, for example, something like this, for example, that enter that as a file name, and the FL will change this portion to the actual subject ID for every individual subject, and it will be looking at those subject-specific files, right? Does it make sense? Do you want me to explain a little better, or this is sufficient for the second alternative? You can either use these keys for specifying the file names or folder structures that correspond to the different subjects, or you can use this two-step procedure by entering the actual files during the import configuration file, and then just pointing them here in the ROIs configuration file to use those ROIs. Do you have any questions, or do you have any functionality that you think might not be subsumed by this sort of functionality? Some cases that you think, well, I have this kind of like weird scenario that doesn't fit any of these two functionality that you provide.
Not for now.
Not for now. Okay. If you run into any issues with this, just let me know. Or if you figure out run into some case that you cannot. Or it's not clear how to enter that data into our FL pipeline, or in either of these two ways, just let me know. I mean, for now, the only things that we are using these ROIs are for ROI level analysis. In the future, we are going to be using these ROIs for more stuff. This is just as I keep adding stuff to the FL pipeline, one of the things I'm going to add is all of the common functionality. So you can use these ROIs also as seeds for seed-based connectivity analysis and those type of things. But currently, these ROIs, I'm making this functionality of specifying ROIs and specifying subject-specific ROIs a little bit more complex than what we, or at least a little bit more comprehensive than what we actually would need right now, because in the future I'm expecting for us to be using these ROIs for multiple different scenarios, not only for this type of ROI analysis that we are using right now, but other sort of stuff. Okay, so that was the other thing that I wanted to mention. Do you have any other questions, or what do you want to talk about?
I think we might be good for now.
Yep.
Maybe we'll try and connect with Jason later in the week, and then by next Monday have a bit more.
Okay, and one of the things I was thinking is that it would be good for us to compare the values in some of these subcortical regions that we know our brain, and like what those values are compared to values in the bold response values, and just it would be nice to see that there are some like order of magnitude above areas like the ventral temporal and orbital frontal areas where we have this massive drop off. So in which case what we probably would want to do is have some really low threshold to get rid of those voxels, and then the anatomical mass to get rid of the other non-brain. So when we sit and look at this, let's try to take a look at that. Hopefully we can do that. Hopefully that would be fairly straightforward. Cool. When you Google this, it pops up. If you Google SPM default threshold, there are a bunch of people that are asking workarounds for that. Alfonso, that we had an email thread going back and forth. We should pick that up again at some point when I get back to focusing on it. It has to do with being like basically displaying displaying free surfer surface recons in MNI space, or alternatively, free surfer recons in world space, so that if we have voxel coordinates, like just XYZ coordinates in a volume, that we can display them nicely on the free surfer cortical surface.
Right. So we had some. Yeah, I mean, we have all the tools to put them into world space. And world space, we mean basically subject space, which is the actual space of the structural data that free surfer knows about.
Right.
But then to put that into M&I space, that it requires some additional source of information. We can either go through the M&I normalization that we use. If that structural is run through SPM normalization, then we know that how to transform from subject space to normalized space because of that. But if we don't want to use that, then is the only other kind of like route to get to M&I space is this sort of indirect route through FS average. We could go from subject space voxels in the vertex of those surfaces to coordinates in FS average, and then from coordinates in FS average we can display those FS average cortex surfaces on M&I space. But that is a little bit of is not all that right, right? Because it's just like a representation of this FS average space on the M&I space. And you have this additional like FS average structural data that has been normalized, that it would be even better than using that type of FS average to M&I space. But
right. I think we should do is just set up a time where we can just sit down and
talk about all of this.
We can use Megan's the data from the ECOG is a good use case for this. We've started deciding, like, for the time being, it's not a big deal, but just it would be good to know how to do this, I think.
Right, and with the ECOG data, I never knew about this. I mean, I don't know, how do we get these coordinates? Because we keep referring to those as M&I space coordinates, but I'm not totally sure that they are actually M&I space coordinates, because I don't know their procedure, basically, how they work. How do we know that these particular, like, I don't know, how those coordinates were actually created or estimated?
I don't know. It's sort of taken it on faith that they are. They're literally different than the voxel-based coordinates or the RAS coordinates. So, but for Scott's paper, we are going to be sending the Jeremy Greenlee a draft that'll have that question in it.
Okay, excellent.
Explicitly, could you tell us, with some detail, how the M&I coordinates are generated? What my guess is that they have the coordinates in the native space. They know where they are, and then they've applied some M&I transform, and then they transform them to the volume, and then they just apply the transform to those coordinates. But
in native space, do you mean the space of the actual structural data, or do you mean like in some sort of coordinate reference from the head side of?
I'm guessing that it's of the actual structural data, but I'm going to be looking into this more after this meeting.
Yeah, but yes, I mean, if you want to meet, I don't know if you want to do that as part of this meeting or just set up a different meeting for this particular purpose.
Ahead of time. It seems like this is the kind of thing where if you and I meet for a bit, then I'll just be able to disseminate it to people.
Okay,
and,
sounds good.
Save you some time.
Okay, sounds good. So we can do before the next meeting. We can meet a little bit before that, just the two of us, and talk about this a little bit further.
Maybe Megan will want to jump in on it.
Sounds perfect.
All right. Catch you later.
Thanks.
Okay, see you guys. Have fun.
By the way, Megan, for Scott's paper, we decided that in order to actually see, so he has to show like a bunch of